Hello and welcome to Echochamber, the series where I say whatever, whenever, however I want because I'm talking to myself and you can't respond. Well, unless you use YouTube comments, but whoever uses the YouTube comments. Yeah. So this is my less scripted series where I will just go on about stuff. I have a little bit of a just outline here to go over, but today we'll be talking about Zero Time Dilemma. And if you have not played the Zero Escape series before, I highly recommend you just back away, and back away again. Because if you've not played 999, Virtue's Last Reward, and Zero Time Dilemma, there will be so many spoilers here that you really have absolutely no reason to stick around, because I will ruin those games for you, and those games thrive on their plot twists, so you do not want to be listening to this otherwise. But with that said, spoiler warning ending in 5, 4, 3, 2... Okay. So, Zero Time Dilemma, the ending. So if you looked at the title, you might have noticed I'm calling this the real protagonist of the Zero Escape series. What does that mean? Well, let me get to that in a second. There are quite a few plot holes surrounding Zero Time Dilemma, like how Delta knew everything. Yes, he had the mind hack and you could wave it away by saying mind hack, but how did he know everything? So much information he had that he probably should not have known. You also have the final decision game, where he gives Carlos the gun and tells him to either shoot or don't shoot. There has to be a meaning to that, because it's a decision game, right? You also have quite a few sections in the game that, within the context of what happens and what is actually explained to have happened, they don't make any sense. You also have the secret ending to Virtue's Last Reward. Yes, I'm aware that Uchikoshi did come out and say that it was intended to be meta-narrative and not actually canon to it. But I'm going to try to make that work into this theory as well, because realistically, why not? He specifically went out of his way to say that it was left open-ended enough that people can make up their own interpretations, and this is mine. Thought of this at a point, and I just want to give a quick shout out to a theory on Reddit by definitely not Zero. I'll probably throw an annotation linking to this. It's not my original inspiration for this theory, as I actually deviate a lot from this, but when I was fleshing this out, thinking about it more, I had looked for other people's theories to see if they had thought of things I didn't think of, and this really was a really good source for me to look at and basically say, hey, they bring up a lot of good points, because I didn't even know that was an issue. I can see how these can all come together much more effectively now. Another thing to address before I really get into the theory, I want to just discuss the morphogenetic field and how it really works, because I think that's very important to understand the baseline of what we're going to be discussing, the sort of science fiction behind how it works. Realistically, in-game, they're quite vague about it. In a sense, they say it works like the quantum computer, or at least it's heavily implied, where it has a separate dimension and you have your minds, your memories and such stored there, and they send those in a relay to your body. And then you have all these different possible worlds where that single different dimension sends out all these different memories and actions and decisions and whatnot. So that's the basic idea. So basically what you have to assume is that the morphogenetic field, it's a different dimension and has each person's consciousness thing that is whatever you want to call it, that is the combination of everyone's consciousness along with all their memories. Keep in mind that the game does also imply that what make people who they are 1, their memories, and 2, their connection to this morphogenetic field. So you have those two things that make you who you are, because being connected to this morphogenetic field allows you to connect to everything else that makes you you, even if you can't remember all those memories at the time. So it's implied that's how people tend to work. So each person has their own little section of this different dimension where they can send signals. Essentially, this is how I see Shift in the mind hack working. Shift is basically the ability to manipulate your own morphogenetic field. You can forcibly send memories to different bodies. You can switch which of your consciousnesses are seeing through different bodies. It's basically changing the signals and forcibly sending out different signals from your morphogenetic field than you would be able to do otherwise. Let's call it sort of similar to lucid dreaming. Mind hack is the ability to affect other people's morphogenetic fields. Because realistically, what does a morphogenetic field actually do? It's that hub where you send out decisions, you send out memories, and if you're able to forcibly cause someone else to actually send out those signals, then you can do something like cause them momentarily to press a button that they wouldn't press otherwise. After that, let's get into the actual theory. Yes, I've spent quite a bit of time talking already. So the basic of the theory is that the real protagonist of every single Zero Escape game is Sean. No, not the Sean from Zero Time Dilemma, but the one he was modeled after, the little boy that Brother or Delta grew up knowing and died in the hospital. And he takes the place of the question mark person in the actual ending of Virtue's Last Reward, which, as Ushikoshi has said, is intended to be the player, so the player is playing as Sean the entirety of the series. And your next question is probably something along the lines of, Echo, that doesn't make any sense. How the hell does that make any sense? Well, good question. It really is a good one, and let's double back a little bit and talk about a few things before we get into exactly how I think that works. First, we need to talk about the quantum computer, which sees all those realities, and Zero does confirm that this is how it works. It's connected to Sean, or you know what, the one from Zero Time Dilemma. Let's call him Sean Bot, just for the sake of clarity in this. Sean will be the one, the original, and Sean Bot would be the one in Zero Time Dilemma that we thought was Q for most of the game. This computer is supposed to be what allows Sean Bot to actually act like he is a shifter and be able to jump between the different timelines. Then there's the part where you have to realize Sean and everyone else is actually receiving memories of other people. You remember all those times in the game where people had visions of seeing other people die, seeing the executions of other people? They didn't experience that, which means somehow, some way, they must have been getting that. And there's really two ways you could have done that. One, Delta could have used his mind hack in order to push those memories into the people. However, at the same time, you have to realize that there were times Delta version Q was dead and people still got these flashes. So how were people capable of actually seeing other people's memories through that? And you also have to consider the fact that in each of these situations, the flashes they are seeing are from the security cameras, because it's highly implied that each of the section you're seeing, and the reason why the game is more cinematic over the more traditional VLR approach, is because you're actually seeing through the view of the quantum computer as it is connected to all those security cameras. So in order for Carlos and Diana to be getting these memories, period, there's one assumption that you have to make. The quantum computer and the morphogenetic field are linked. Now with this established, let's go on to what exactly Sean is in this sort of situation. I'm proposing that in this case, Sean is essentially, say, a fourth dimensional being who's capable of interacting to a small extent with the same sort of mind hack concepts in order to affect and move each 999 Virtue's Last Reward and Zero Time Dilemma in a direction that actually allows the situation as they do unfold to unfold. Keep in mind that the morphogenetic field does transcend time, so it's not like Sean's morphogenetic field section will have disappeared by the time Zero Time Dilemma will have happened. And ultimately, going on the idea that Sean does exist in this form, I'm suggesting that the Zero Time Dilemma decision games weren't just to make sure Delta and Phi were born as they weren't just to make sure that there is a timeline where everyone is capable with shift and is capable of moving forward and stopping the terrorists from killing everyone. But it also goes out of its way in order to allow Sean in his dormant consciousness at the time to basically become awakened, aware of the morphogenetic field around him, and without his body and such like that, to be disconnected from it and capable of essentially, as Zero puts it, traveling this network, traveling this entire field in order to make those changes, in order to direct the story to unfold as they need it to unfold. Essentially, he becomes the player, he becomes the protagonist, and essentially that's why the player is able to choose all those different choices for each of the main characters throughout the games, and why the third game goes as far as actually having 3 different main characters that you're making decisions for all throughout the story. Now, this probably sounds like a bit of a stretch, even more so than when I was first proposing the idea in the first place. Now, in order to address that, let's look at exactly how it happens and some of the things in the game that really only make sense if this was happening. There are actually 2 significant parts of Zero Time Dilemma that I don't think make much sense in the current context of what is. First, you have the ending where only Sean was left, where he has to go to the quantum computer and make a few decisions. You have to consider, what was the point of that final decision game for him? When I say Sean, I mean Seanbot. Goddamn, I'm confusing myself now. But if the goal of that time was simply for Delta to go back and give little boy Sean his happy memories, his dream world, to give some version of him that happy ending, you don't need to make that decision. You don't need to make any of those decisions whatsoever. You don't need to create that decision game, period. Because at that point, all you need to do is give him the code. You don't need to tell him anything. You don't need to do anything. You especially don't need to tell Seanbot about his origins. And I think the key to all this is in the happy ending itself. In this happy ending, Seanbot starts to truly believe he is Sean. He gains his aspirations, he gains some of his memories, he gains his life, and he truly believes he's going on to have this happy, never-ending world. By doing this, the branching timeline, the consciousness of Sean and Seanbot become merged. In a sense, you could actually say that they are the same person now. They just happen to have different bodies, different memories at the time, because we actually see this phenomenon also done elsewhere. The transporter. It creates physical bodies for people, and the morphogenetic field manages to connect to them. It manages to actually reach out and connect to that consciousness. Essentially, Sean and the quantum computer become one being. Delta actually says it himself, "I want to see the world as you do." He wants to be able to see the endless realities put out by the quantum computer. He wants to be able to predict a timeline that will actually result in everyone living. Now, presumably before the game, he was able to do this before, but at the same time, he knew in the same way he was born in the game and sent back to cause this to happen, he had to actually set it up so that this bootstrap paradox was created again, so that the connection between the morphogenetic field and the quantum computer was made, and he'd be able to be in the presence of both Sean as well as Seanbot in order to actually connect and mind hack into the quantum computer's prediction of all these different timelines. And with that, we can move on to talking about the second scene that really just does not make sense to me at all. The final decision game, where he gives the gun to Carlos and decides whether to shoot Delta or to not shoot Delta. Again, you could argue that he was just giving them a chance to seek out the revenge or not because of everything he put them through, but he does call it decision game, and he does specifically go out of his way to allow it to happen. It seems a bit out of place. You could say that it's just like some final moment to end the game on, but still, I'd like to make a little bit more sense than just these sort of throwaway explanations. The obvious reason Delta would do it is because he wants to create a specific future. He wants to stop the terrorists from killing all the people. He wants to create a timeline where no one else has to die. You don't need 6 billion to die. You don't need 8 billion to die. And this gives a good point to that end of the game. It actually wraps up all the different threads, even the idea of how do they stop the terrorists, quite well. This is actually the only thing that makes sense, because otherwise, how would Zero actually know that any of the timelines created would actually result in people having lived, actually result in the terrorists being, well, stopped? There are two different possibilities I could think of for this. The first one is the idea that throughout his travels, in the same way that he learned about the terrorists killing 8 billion, he'd actually come across someone who knew a future beyond that because of the shifting in mind hacking. But at the same time, the reason someone with 8 billion would actually come back and shift back is because they knew that it would happen. The same way that you had with Sigma and Phi from the Virtue's Last Report timeline. You can look into their psyches and figure out that that situation actually happened because they had to shift back. But in that situation, the reason they shifted back because something horrible happened. He's looking for a future where nothing horrible happens, which means people shifting back, especially since Akane was talking about how shifters were happening because the crisis was unfolding and becoming a thing and the people were predicting it to happen. You have to imagine that the likeliness he came across someone who had no reason to shift, didn't necessarily even gain shifting powers because of that, was almost nothing. Compare that to the likeliness that he'd be able to essentially mind hack into the quantum computer and search through all those timelines for a timeline that actually allows him to create the future he wants, and I'm pretty sure the quantum computer makes a whole lot more sense. And that's all without even considering trying to fit Virtue's Last Rewards ending, the secret ending, into that the another ends. So basically, we know Kyle was sent back to this time somehow. Now, where was he? Now, let's say Akane said ? Which is the player, which in this theory is Sean, as the player plays as Sean, would be sent back. The thing that really makes the most sense to me is that Kyle was either sent back there for maybe an instant, or he was never really sent back there at all, and he was just sent into the morphogenetic field in the same way. In this theory, Sean would be just drifting around it, and he wouldn't be conscious of that. In a sense, you could say he'd be dead in the same way a dead person at a certain point in their life is still in the morphogenetic field, but they're not really dead in there, but they're in... you get what I'm saying. Because in this case, Akane would actually have to know everything about Sean, because in a sense, you recall how Delta actually invited her to go to the Free the Soul meeting. He would have told her everything there, and she would have manipulated Sigma into setting up the plan in a way that he thought that Kyle was going to be sent back, only for Kyle to really be used as a way to introduce Sean to the VLR timeline. And ultimately, this point of the plan is actually pretty key. Keep in mind that Sean, even though he's disconnected from actually needing a body in the morphogenetic field, is still just a consciousness and memories within a morphogenetic field. In that case, he also needs that same sort of training that Sigma and Phi, Junpei, Carlos, and in a sense Akane all had at a time. Bringing him into the Virtue's Last Reward timeline actually sets him up sort of like the player, a consciousness that, while interacting with the game, doing things their own way, was not totally and completely aware of their actual role in the story itself. This is why the consciousness only really has memories of that, as Sean at this point is basically like a god playing a game, sort of like the player. His memories and experience before grabbing his actual memories from the morphogenetic field in the same way Phi or Sigma would, were the same as Sigma at that time. In a sense, he knew more because, as purposely done, he was written like the player, and he saw things from that same player's perspective. Taking over Kyle's body and actually being able to see everything from that perspective allows him to, in the same way Sigma and Phi were, be awakened to his ability and be able to actually actively control that power. It's as Zero said in Zero Time Dilemma, "He who controls the computer can traverse the universe." And with Sean being able to do this, he's able to influence 999, Virtue's Last Reward, and Zero Time Dilemma in a way that all this could actually result in the ending they wanted. Hell, let's say he's also the one who caused the snail to show up in Zero's story. Because hey, even the epilogue section on that does sort of suggest that the snail was purposely pushed there to cause these chain of events. In this theory, you could also argue that Sean's the one who's actively causing morphogenetic fields to actually send out the memories and cause people to be able to shift properly. Again, that's a bit more on a limb than the other parts of this, but it's a possibility too. Overall, the only part of this theory that I'm not a big fan of is the fact that Kyle's role is essentially to be a human puppet, but unfortunately that's the only way I could really make it make sense to me. And realistically, I think this makes sense. I think I've covered basically as much as I can. I'm not going to claim I did extensive research onto every single detail throughout the 3 games to make sure it works with everything. The theory is a bit vague, especially in how it interacts with everything in the games, because it's sort of like a meta level of how it works at that point, and it is similar to some other stuff, but I like how this one works, because if it was basically, you know what I'm talking about, if you know what I'm talking about, if you don't need to worry about it. If it was the same as that, then I would actually be disappointed because I didn't like that twist that much. But in this sense, I feel as though the idea that it works into how the morphogenetic field works, and it's not really like some outside presence, it's simply just someone who is actually thrown into the network and is just traversing it in a different way. I think that's really cool, and I think it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, if there's plot holes, if there's whatever, just let me know. This is a great series, and I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff I overlooked. So let me know. I'm actually curious where I went wrong, because there's a decent chance I went wrong somewhere. And if something doesn't make sense, also let me know. I can probably clarify. I could probably do something of that nature. Otherwise, I'll see you all next time. If there is a next time, there won't be a next time. This is the end of the series, goddammit. No, Ichikyoshi, give me more. I want more Zero Escape, please. Please. I'll be looking forward to whatever he does next. See you all next time. Drive safely.